Anything to share? Anything special going on? Yes. Today is Lance's birthday. Yes. Well, we're going to sing in church. Do you want to sing twice? No? Okay. Once is enough? Once is enough. All right. Fair enough. But yes, so happy birthday to Lance. Any other special announcements? Concerns? Yes. A joke?
How many retired people does it take to change a light bulb? One, but it takes them all day.
Ha! I will repeat that for the people watching at home. How many retired people does it take to change a light bulb? One, but it takes them all day. That was a good one. A Pollock joke?
He's standing on a chair. How long does it take him? As long as he's got somebody to hold the chair and turn it.
Yeah. A Pollock, as long as he has someone to hold the chair and turn it for him. I'm glad Jerry's not here. He might take offense at that. Oh, good. All right, yeah, so jokes. If all we have is jokes, then we can, man, I heard a good one the other day. But no, we'll save it for next week. We can't just tell jokes here. So we're back in Hebrews, and we're to of course, most of the book was really just talking about Jesus and his sacrifice in different ways. But now we're on to the application section. We're talking about Christian living. Last chapter talked about having faith, and that's faith is being certain of what we hope for and confident in things we don't see. And then now he's going to say, well, what is the thing you don't see that you fix your eyes on? Metaphorically speaking, you fix your eyes on Jesus, even though you don't see him, yet we do see him by faith. And that's going to be the connection between today's and the previous readings. That what is our faith focused on? It is Jesus Christ. And then how do we live according to that truth? So I'll say a quick prayer blessing, and then we'll look at this for about 30 minutes. Lord Jesus, we thank you for your kindness to us. We ask your blessing on this study of your word. Help it move and inspire us to fix our eyes on Jesus, no matter what's going on in our lives, and to just consider him, to be thankful for all he's done for us, and to follow the example he set for us. And it's in his name that we ask it. Amen. So Hebrews 12 now. Let's go ahead and just read the first 3 verses. Very encouraging verses here. Very well known. Anna, thank you. By the way, Anna's with us, visiting from Pullman, where she's now at school. I think you all knew that, but... Yeah, I forget who has the other microphone. Oh, yeah, there's another one here. Did anyone want the second mic? No. All right, but Anna's got this one.
All right. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart.
All right, so several questions here. First of all, how does he tailor his description of Jesus for his audience? Meaning he points out some details about Jesus' experience that would be very relevant for what they were experiencing. Yes?
He calls him the pioneer and perfecter of faith. In other words, for you that don't know, this is the guy that started it.
Yeah, so he just told us to live by faith. Jesus, he started living by faith. He lived by faith more than anybody else. And he perfected the faith. What do you think he means by pioneer and perfecter of our faith? Yours says author, or you say...
Yeah, this one says author.
Author and perfecter. Okay, so you can, and both are valid translations. I think the word is like arche gain or something. It's related to the originator. So you can see how the originator could be the author because it's the person who starts it, but it could be the pioneer because it's the first one. I don't know, that maybe that could bring something out. What do you think about calling him the author or the pioneer or the perfecter of our faith? What is it talking about there? Yeah.
To me, pioneer doesn't quite sound right. I mean, because think of the pioneers out west.
Yeah.
Pioneers out west, not necessarily one who had gone before, but just looking ahead.
Sure, yeah. I think in English, the word pioneer has a lot of baggage, so it's hard to hear it in a way that makes any sense applied to Jesus.
The author is, he wrote it. He's the creator. He's the one who started it.
Yeah, so he's the originator of it. You could use the Greek word there, if I'm thinking of the right one. I didn't read it last night, but I've read it before. I believe it could be also originator. You know, that would be a decent translation. So he's the one who started the faith, and he's the one who brings it to completion. Anything else about how that describes Jesus? You know, what does it mean to call him that? I mean, how did Jesus author our faith? It's kind of an abstract concept. His life, are you thinking?
Kind of two parts. One is from the beginning, he was there.
Okay.
So he could, set the stage for everything.
Yeah.
And he was here with the light to, give us faith that it can be done.
Yeah. So there's two sides. There's his own. He is the object of our faith, meaning our faith is in him, and he's always existed. And so he is the source of our faith. It's where our faith comes from because our faith is in him. But also, he then, as a human, lived a life of faith and the perfect life of faith. So that in both senses, we maybe sometimes if we think about justified by faith, we might think about, the book of Romans or Paul, because Paul uses that phrase, and on Reformation Sunday, we usually talk about what Paul wrote, but really Jesus is the source of faith. I mean, that started with him. He lived it, he showed it, he brought it into being. And then how about the phrase perfecter of our faith? Okay, so he lived that perfect life of faith. Yeah. Yep. Oh, sure, yeah. So that's a good point for both of these phrases, really, that our faith comes 100% from him. It's not like he contributes to it, but he is all of it. And maybe by comparison, think about like Roman Catholic theology that would say our faith is kind of in Jesus, but also kind of in the saints. And, in fact, I was just talking to a Catholic person, and they were about Lutheranism, and they said, well, I kind of get what your point is about only praying to Jesus, but there's some of these saint prayers that are so fun to say, and but no, it's 100% in Jesus. All right, anything else there? By the way, this question is not on the sheet. I just wanted to ask this first. Are there any other details in his description of Jesus that really fit what we know the audience was going through at this time?
Verse 2, For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. So he wasn't looking for his fame and glory here on earth. He had a job to do, he did the job, and it was done, and he's in glory.
Yeah, he was willing to suffer. He did his job on earth before glory. And why is that so relevant for what they were experiencing? Yeah, they were being persecuted as well. And so they had to do the same thing, to be faithful despite persecution. And I'll go ahead and point out verse 3. He endured such opposition from sinners so that you now wouldn't grow weary as you're enduring opposition from sinners. Okay, good. So that same detail, so I thought I'd add it. Anything else in there that you think would really be, I mean, of course, it's generically helpful too for all Christians, but that really fits what the Hebrew audience was experiencing? Any other details in there? Yep. Oh, the race, yeah. Yes, it's not like a 100-meter, it's like a marathon. Yeah. The race marked out for us. Yeah. It's a good point. I didn't catch the first part of your sentence.
Being surrounded by, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles.
Yeah. So that's, I mean, really true for us as well, but why, how did it really fit their situation back then?
All you're thinking about is your troubles and your persecution and woe is me. You're not putting your eyes where they ought to be.
Yeah.
You're raising on Jesus.
Yeah, so they were just looking at their Jewish friends who had rejected them, you know, people they'd grown up with, maybe members of their family who now ostracized them for being Christians, and that was discouraging. So what was so encouraging was to remember, well, you may not be surrounded by them anymore. You may not have that fellowship, but what do you have? You have this great cloud of witnesses. This may be a bad analogy, but you know the end of Star Wars when all those people kind of come back as a hologram? You know, it's been a long time since I've seen those. I'm not really a big Star Wars fan, but so if you can imagine something like that, you know, you're standing here, and it's not like they're literally there, but you are surrounded by this cloud of witnesses. You don't see them, you know, but even though your other Jewish friends in town have kicked you out, you're now surrounded by Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and David and all these people from the past, all these saints in the correct term, all these people who were martyred for their faith, they're all now with you, and you've joined their group even though you don't see it. And of course, the author and perfecter of that whole thing is Jesus, and he's there with you too. So it's an encouragement. You've been kicked out of one group, but you're part of this bigger, better group. Anything else? And of course, that's an encouragement for all of us. So let's see. Maybe we can start applying it to ourselves. But anything else you notice in this section? One last call for something that would have really spoken to the situation they were in. I think we've looked at pretty much all the details at this point. And so let's look at some of the, well, there's only one application question. Number 7, the writer pictures us running in a race. And as you said, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. It's a grueling, 25 miles of pain. And that's what he says, through rugged and brushy terrain. What are some things that hinder our race that we should throw off? That's a good point they have here. The ancient marathon, they didn't have a track. They didn't have a road system like the Romans did, so they would have just been running over the ground. Yeah, rocks. And they probably had paths that were worn, but they didn't have anything like a modern road, so their feet would have been much different than our feet. But anyway, what are some things that hinder our race that we want to throw off so that we can run this race with perseverance? And you see why he says run with perseverance, right? He doesn't say run with speed. He says run enduring for the long haul. What are some things we need to throw aside?
Extra baggage.
Extra baggage? Okay. Any concrete thoughts on what that looks like, or?
Don't be distracted by other things. When keep your mind on the task that you're doing.
Sure.
To run.
So kind of just anything. So when you're running, maybe you're thinking of actually running too, that you got to focus on what you're doing. Yeah. But then anything that takes our focus away from Jesus, really. What were you going to say there, Tesha? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. So in our society, especially, just fun things. What am I going to do this weekend? What am I going to wear? Things that were luxuries for most people in history still can be distracting.
It can be more than that. I mean,
Yeah.
how do I get out of bed and get into the living room or get into the dining room to eat, you know?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Just little things, but they pass.
Are you thinking specifically when you're ill? Okay, yeah. So you're right. Even recovering from a surgery, certainly nothing anybody would say is a sinful thing to do, right? It's a necessary thing. And yet, you can get so focused on it that you forget about Jesus for a while because you're just focused on that. So yeah, I mean, and we're humans. We have limited focus. It's very easy to just focus on one thing. That's why we need to keep coming back to church, make God's Word a regular part of our life because that refocuses us. But yeah, good point. So not just sinful things, although he does say the sin that so easily entangles, but notice he says everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. So some things that hinder us are not inherently sinful. Others are. So what are some other things that we need to throw aside to run the race with endurance? Any other thoughts? Or, I mean, I think we've answered it pretty well in a generic sense, but if you had any more specific examples.
Everything we do on a daily basis, you know, pay the bills, buy food, you know,
Yeah.
what are you gonna eat today? You know, how am I gonna get through the week? You know,
Yeah.
I mean, there are just all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. And it's not saying we don't do those things, because obviously we don't go live in a cave like a hermit. There are Christians who kind of thought of the Christian life that way in history. You know, there were people who said the only way to really have a strong faith is to just leave society and go be a hermit, be a monk, only live and focus on that. But we don't say that. However, it's like we're just sort of constantly casting it away. I mean, it's a really neat picture. We're kind of running this fast because we're not sprinting, and we're in pain. You know, we got a side thing, and we're tripping over things every now and then. And it's kind of like we get our bills and stuff, and okay, pay the bill. Okay, you know, do that. A car broke down. Okay, I got to fix it. But those things don't stop us. They don't distract us. We keep going, and we're looking at Jesus. We're running towards him. And where is he? As we're looking at him, where do we see him? And I mean, of course, you could say different things, but where does the author here of Hebrews say that we see him? Yeah, he sat down at the right hand of God. I mean, we know he suffered. It's not like we forget that. But we also say, hey, he's finally entered into glory. He has sat down at the throne of God, and eventually we're going to be with him. Like right now, we're suffering like he suffered, but we're going to be where he is, and we're going to get that same glory and vindication at the end. Of course, we think about how he endured the cross. I mean, so both are in view. But notice, I think that phrase we haven't talked about. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross. So what insight does that give us into Jesus' suffering? Yep.
Not entirely unlike a woman giving birth with no pregnancy. She knows she's going to get a great baby out of it, so she'll endure that. Something like that.
No, there's just a story I want to share, but I don't know if I can. Can I say something funny that you said when... I just remember Kelly saying, I should have got the epidural. I should have got the epidural. I should have got the epidural. That's all. Thank you for permission to share that. I can't relate beyond that, but yeah, so you go through it without the medicine because you know the joy that's coming at the end. So, okay, but some people do, yeah. Well, and it was a very, yeah, okay. Yeah, so for the joy set before him, so he knew there would be joy. Did he have that joy as he was on the cross? No. It's not like he was on the cross thinking, oh, this is okay because I know. No, I mean, at the time it hurt, but he knew there would be the joy coming. And I guess that's the same when you're giving birth. Again, most of us, half of us can't relate, but the other, you'll have to answer. When you're giving birth, is it possible for you to kind of just remove yourself from the situation and visualize yourself with the baby and the pain just goes away? No. Okay, yeah. So you can't, the future joy that you anticipate cannot alleviate or nullify or ameliorate, none of those seem like the perfect word, but it can't get rid of the suffering. It can't lessen it, but it can give you something to hope for when it's over, basically. And that's the same thing with Jesus. He endured it, scorned its shame, he endured it, he accepted all the shame, but he knew what was going to come later. So the same thing for us. And I think that's helpful. It'll even be relevant to our message today that, and we've talked about this maybe a few weeks ago, you don't necessarily try to find the silver lining in your suffering. Sometimes you can, and that's good, but other times you really don't see a silver lining. You're just suffering, and it stinks. And what gets you through it is that you know it's coming to an end, and you're going to have eternal glory. That's your ultimate hope. Not that something, well, it's okay because of this, or it's okay because of that, or I'm sure God is doing, you're looking forward to it being over. And you know it will be. Yeah. True, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, joy is not happiness. Right. We haven't talked about that I can remember, that joy is not happiness. But it's a good point, a good distinction. So anybody have any insight on that? What the difference between joy and happiness? Or you mentioned it, maybe you could talk about it, but right. Yeah. Yeah. So joy, you're saying, is more inner. Happiness is... Joy is an attitude. Okay. And compared to happiness, what would happiness be then? So you said feeling, pleasure. Anything else you'd say about happiness, Barb? Temporary. Yeah. Sure, yeah. Joy is long-lasting, whereas happiness is temporary. I'm just trying things out here. Let me know if this works or not. Happiness is more based on sort of what's happening in your life, external circumstances, things like how much sleep you had, what you've eaten, and what's going on around you, whereas joy is maybe even a deeper spiritual thing that you may not be, smiling and energetic. You could even be suffering, and yet you could have joy. Yeah. Yeah. But then, I hope if you can, you're laughing and smiling, but you don't have to be, because there might be things that mute that, and yet you can still have joy. Yep.
It wasn't happy to lose my parents when my mother died.
There you go. Good example. Yeah.
And then the 24th of January, my dad died. 33 days apart.
Yeah.
And he died a Christian. That was not a given because he spent almost all of his years being really angry at God. The
Yeah.
last 10 days of his life, he was a Christian.
Yeah. So,
And I was not happy about the situation, but I was joyful. And I really wanted one more hug from both of them.
yeah.
Never begrudged them him.
Right.
Just
Yeah. So that's a very good example to help us think of the difference. When her father died, she said, and he had only been a Christian for 10 days. So obviously a lot of joy in that he had converted, knowing that he had gone to heaven, but yet you're not happy. And that's a time when we can feel the difference. Now, often joy will look happy. I mean, I would hope if there was someone who was always dour and always frowning and never smiling, you'd wonder, do they have joy? Maybe they do, and they just have a lot of pain. But, often joy and happiness overlap. It's just that they don't always. And when they don't, that helps us to understand what the difference really is between them. So, good point. Worth noting, God doesn't call on us to be happy. That is kind of if you listen to 104.9 Shine FM, which I've started listening to lately in the car because I prefer it to the regular pop station. If we got to listen to pop music, it might as well be Christian pop. But, a place like Life Center, Real Life, pop Christian music, kind of pop Christianity in America, sometimes it can give you the impression that to be a Christian means you're sort of always happy and, bouncy and smiley, and there's a certain tone that you're going to talk with, that your voice is going to have a certain upbeat tone, and that's just what it means to be a Christian. Well, they're overlooking the suffering and the bearing the cross and things like that. You don't have to always be that. There's not a certain behavior that we have to take on. Now, then again, we are called to be loving. So, we're not going to be mean or nasty to people. But, if you're in a lot of pain, God doesn't expect you to just act like you're not, So anyway, recognizing suffering is a big Lutheran distinction, I think, especially compared to Arminianism or theologies that claim, that if you just have a strong enough faith, God's going to bless you and everything's going to be good. The cross is it's something Jesus endured, but it's something God calls us to carry. And things like the book of Job or the psalm we're going to read today help us to keep that in mind. The Christian life it's described as running a painful marathon. This is a teaching that we don't usually share with somebody when you're trying to convert them, the first time. We don't put it in advertisements. Come suffer with us. Come take up your cross and be a Christian. But that's a big part of discipleship. All right, any other thoughts on this section? Things that hinder our race? And I think everything you said about hindering our race could also be applied to it's something that takes our focus away from Jesus. And that's why it's something to be overcome. Yes? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Don't brush aside somebody else's suffering. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I have this on my mind because that's part of what the message is about today, is about how we handle suffering, and especially real serious suffering, that we can't really see a silver lining, but we'll get into that later. And sometimes it makes us uncomfortable, and so we don't want to talk about it or acknowledge it, but we should, especially when other people are hurting. Let's see. So that's the first 3 verses. The next 3 verses, interesting. Now he gets into a little bit more discipline. Do we have time? Yeah, let's just go ahead and read 4 through 6. We'll have to do this part quickly because I want to end in 5 minutes. Who's got the mic who didn't read yet? All right, Jake, could you read
4 through 6?
4 through 6.
In your struggle against sin, you have not resisted to the point of shedding your blood. And have you completely forgotten this word of encouragement that addresses you as a father addresses his son? It says, "My son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you. because the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and he chastens everyone he accepts as his son.
Okay. Yeah. This might seem almost a little harsh. What's this message getting at? When he says, in your struggle against sin, you have not resisted to the point of shedding your blood. What do you think he means by shedding your blood? Yeah. It's like, you guys haven't even been killed for your faith yet. Seems like kind of a, I don't know. I would feel, if I were writing to a congregation over in China, I would feel a little bit rude or insensitive saying, I know you guys are suffering a lot, but I mean, none of you have even been killed at this point. That would seem to me a little insensitive. But that's what he writes. You haven't yet even resisted to the point of shedding your blood. Have you forgotten that when the Lord disciplines you, it's a good thing? So I think what he's saying here is, yes, you've had setbacks. Yes, you've been persecuted. But, and you have kind of shrunk away, instead of being ready to give your life and just stepping into it bravely, you've kind of stepped back because you don't like the Lord's discipline. And he's saying, don't you know discipline is a sign that God loves you and he's with you. He chastens you because he accepts you as a son. And so don't shrink back from this discipline. Don't think of it as a sign that God has rejected you, but accept it as a sign that he loves you and stand firm in it and be ready to shed blood if it comes to that. So pretty strong statement, and it helps us put the things we've been talking about in perspective. I mean, yes, we struggle against sin. We have to throw things aside, but even if it were throw aside preserving your life, we would be called to do that. We are called to love Jesus to that point and to be that faithful. So maybe a sobering thought to end on, but any application there? On the other hand, I've heard some people say, it might be easier to, if someone were to, walk in here with a gun and say, do you believe in Jesus or not? That might almost be easier than some of the subtle temptations we face to sin, because then it's all on the line, it's black or white, but sort of the daily sin of, I don't need to pray today. I can be a little bit selfish here and there. The sin that so easily entangles, sometimes that, maybe it's less in your face, there's less of a contrast, but it can be just as deadly. So if we're ready to stand up and give our lives for Jesus, shouldn't we be ready to struggle against sin every day? And that's the point he's making here. And, okay, here's a good application for us too to end on, and to share our faith, right? If somebody had a gun to your head and you'd confess Jesus, well, what if they don't have a gun to your head, but you're just casually talking? But then, I'm so scared. I don't want to share my faith. I'm nervous about what they say. Well, why? Why should we be so terrified in that situation? We're ready to give our lives, right? Even if they react so strongly that they kill us, we should be ready to do it. How much more so if they're just going to kind of think, oh, you're weird. Is that really the worst thing to have someone think that we're weird? Is that really such a horrible punishment to have a slightly awkward conversation? But we should stand firm and not shrink back in our confession of Jesus. All right, well, we should end there, because I hopefully got somebody coming in a minute that I'm going to talk to, so we'll resume with a worship service in a few minutes. Save your sheets. We'll use them next week.